consulting background and offers experience, active participation, and a sales resource group approach to consulting with clients. David has over 25 years experience consulting for organizations in diverse fields such as broadcast and print media, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, information technology, retail, manufacturing, and financial services. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to David to start.
Thank you very much, Rupalin, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining today. I just have to there we go. All right, the agenda, I'm going to start off with a brief introduction and then go into the why you need to question some of your sales compensation plan elements. Then go through the 10 key questions to ask, what your answer should tell you at the end, and what dependencies need to take place in order to optimize your plan effectiveness. So, sales compensation plan is an essential management communications tool. To be effective, it should do two things. It should tell your salespeople and the line management what you value and want to pay them for delivering, and where they need to spend their time and effort. If it does those two things well, it'll generally be successful. But it's also a vehicle to attract, motivate, and retain top salespeople. It's the focal point that allows you to initiate and reinforce desired sales behavior as well as supporting business goals, sales objectives, and it rewards salespeople for the acquisition and retention of your client customer's business. So sales compensation, and one of the reasons why it's such a huge topic these days, is that it does play a critical part, not only in paying people, but ensuring that you get the right people and that they're performing optimally. This is a slide that we use a lot with senior management teams because it really takes some of the mystery out of it. Part of what causes the mystery around sales compensation is that you have to get it to align with business goals and objectives. But to do that, you need to get alignment of a number of other elements as well. So you start first with business goals and objectives, and then look at the sales, marketing, and service strategies that must be executed in order to achieve those goals. Following that, you look at the tactical execution requirements. What kinds of behaviors, what kind of activities do we need our salespeople to execute in order to execute those strategies? But in order to do that, you also need some of the business tools. You need the CRM, you need the formal processes, you need the tracking and monitoring and measuring tools that allow you to be able to identify what people are doing and how well they're doing it. Once you have those tools in place, you then have to look at the organization structure. How have we structured the roles and responsibilities to ensure that when people are executing in the field, that it's coordinated and that we're able to really address the issues and the needs of customers in different markets. Once we are comfortable that we have our organization structure and the roles laid out properly, we then need to understand what are the performance measures that we're going to use in order to assess whether people are doing those jobs correctly. Once you get alignment between these elements, the sales compensation plan actually becomes fairly straightforward. And sales compensation is an output from this alignment. A lot of times we'll get people say, if we could only get the right compensation plan, it would deliver the right kind of results. But sales comp is an output, not an input. As an aside, once you go through this process of alignment, it also tells you some of the gaps that you have in terms of sales competency and what your training needs are, the kinds of information that salespeople need in order to sell successfully, as well as the processes that need to be in place in order to ensure that that it's a repeatable sales process. So why should you challenge or question your sales compensation plan? Today it's all about the pace of change. Not only do goals and strategies change, but markets have tended to be fairly volatile, with making it very difficult for people to set longer-term goals as well as create that competitive advantage that they can sustain going forward. Putting into place sales compensation plans that can only change annually sometimes is a challenge depending on the kind of market. What we are seeing is a lot more adjustments or exceptions where salespeople, because of certain accounts that they're going after or the way in which the company's making changes, make it difficult for the sales comp plan to address 100% of the opportunities. A second reason to challenge is that you need to get the desired behavior that you want out of your salespeople. And if you're not getting that, it's likely that the comp plan isn't initiating and reinforcing those things. Today, everyone's asking for growth. How do we get growth? And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but growth is all about new business plus retention. With an improving economy, the potential for turnover as well. And we're hearing through recruitment firms that there's a lot more interest and a lot more opportunities out there as companies are starting to hire more and people are looking for new opportunities if they're in a situation where they feel they need a change. So in order to be able to attract and retain the right people, you need to make sure you have the right kind of compensation plan. The other thing is, if you have multiple products and services, you know, if you don't have the right plan in place, you may be getting low margin, easy to sell product sales, but it may be much more difficult where you have a higher margin product that's maybe a premium, and it's what you need in order to achieve your financial goals, but you're not getting people selling it. So in order to get a balanced selling effort, you need the right compensation plan in place. The last point here is that things have changed a lot in the marketplace, and I'll give you 3 examples. We're starting to see a lot more in the technology marketplace where people are selling cloud solutions that are tied into recurring revenue as opposed to the traditional on-premise pay for a large software purchase. They're moving more now towards paying on a monthly basis for renting the software and upgrading it as part of that rental. On top of that, there's a lot more solution selling. The days of selling features and benefits are gone, and it's really about identifying the needs of the customer and developing customized solutions. And selling that way and compensating is very different than it was in the past. And finally, a lot of manufacturing and software services companies are also finding that charging for professional services has become a larger component of salespeople and make focus on those things. All sort of the new reality. Let's jump into some of the questions. Do we have the right roles in the sales compensation? Well, in order to identify whether those the roles that you have in your plan should be in there, you need to make sure that the criteria are clear. It should be someone who carries an individual or team quota. It should also contribute directly to the sales achievement, whether that's transactionally in terms of actually being part of the presentation team, or it could be that the role is integral in the overall selling process, such as sales, management roles, and sometimes support roles that are you also want sales contributions that can be objectively measured. A lot of times customers are looking at customer satisfaction as a measure, but it's very hard to tie it to the individual's achievement. And then it makes it very difficult to include in the plan because you can't measure it objectively. Another reason that you need the right kind of sales compensation plan is that you need an incentive to be able to attract and retain certain types of roles. You want it also in a marketplace where the marketplace is highly competitive. It may be required that you have certain roles on your compensation plan. So depending on what the competition is doing and what they're offering, it may be necessary for you to include a particular role in your plan. And then finally, we need to ask ourselves, how do we assess the performance of people in those roles, and does it align with the way in which we're rewarding other sales roles within the organization? The comment at the bottom, are there too many sales horses at the trough? What we're finding a lot of, however, is a lot of different sales roles are being compensated on the same sale. And as a result, the compensation cost of sales is quite a bit higher. So what do we do with that? Part of it is we need to make sure that if we do have more than one role tied into that sale, that they're not all being compensated off the same criteria. In other words, multiple commissions, for example, which really just cuts into the company's overall profitability on that sale. This is a good example of a role profile that captures some of the key characteristics for each of the selling requirements. So when and this actually comes from a client who goes through and actually analyzes each of their sales people or their sales roles to see whether or not it fits properly into the plan. So they look at headcount, they look at the sales cycle to see the time from identification to close. What is a person accountable for? Is it a territory? Is it a portfolio of accounts? What are some of the key elements of the role, and what are they being held accountable for? And then, are there other people that are involved in the sale that actually share that accountability, or maybe have more accountability, and how does this role interact with those? The next is looking at the relative prominence. We'll talk a little bit about prominence on another slide, but it's really to see how prominent the individual is in the actual sale itself. And then finally, they identify possible incentive measures or goal size as part of identifying what they utilize in their plans. So the second question is, why are we paying commissions, bonuses, or both? Well, paying appropriately means that when you're looking at things like commissions, you want that to be for direct sales responsibility. Very often what we are seeing are plans that have the direct salesperson who is commissioned on a sale, and then other roles that are also commissioned on top of that, that are overlay positions. Things like management roles or support roles or additional contributors. But paying commissions to them really isn't the right method of rewarding them. And what it does do is it tends to reduce the profitability on every sale. As a result, we don't recommend paying for overlay positions. And management payout should be based on a roll-up of direct reports. Putting sales managers on overlay commissions really just focuses them on things that are related to the actual sale rather than managing the people that are making the sale. When do you use commissions? They're appropriate when you want to focus on transactional sales, when your objective is solely revenue. They're great in startups when you don't have a lot of cash to be able to pay base salaries, and when you can't set accurate targets. If you can't set a target, commission is really the only way to go, because you're only paying out on the actual sales. With new products or when market growth is unlimited, sales commissions are an appropriate way to pay. Conversely, bonuses, when a critical target is important for you to achieve, bonuses are the more appropriate way to pay. We typically find as organizations mature, they start up with commissions, but as margins shrink and competition increases, they become more mature, and the move towards bonuses becomes imperative. Part of that reason is you're looking more at margin at that point to fund the continuing growth of the business. Very often you'll also see sales organizations where they have unequal territory potential. So if somebody's working in a highly dense urban area and somebody else is working in a vast rural area, in order to equalize the territory potential, you use different bonus payouts for different targets. When growth is limited as well, bonuses become more of an appropriate way to pay. We tend to use both commissions and bonuses when the incentive component is 30% or more, and we're looking for a commission on sales, but secondarily we're looking for achievement of the overall target to pay out. How you split the commission versus target will depend on the degree of whether your sales are sort of new business oriented or whether they're more mature and existing companies as well, existing customers rather. So this is just a model that sort of shows on the vertical axis the maturity of the business. So as the business is more emerging up here, you would tend to pay more commission. As you move down, the business becomes more mature, you tend to shift from a commission model to more of a bonus model. Same thing is true in terms of the amount of new business. When your overall sales have a high degree of new business, you want to pay more commission oriented, and as you move more towards target achievement as a goal, that's when you'll want to pay more bonus or some sort of a team bonus if it's very low degree of new business and a very mature business. Question we get asked all the time is, do we have the right mix of base salary and incentive? And when you look at the desired impact on behavior and the type of sales that will generally dictate the mix, the degree of direction or behavioral impact, plans that have less than 10% of their total compensation at risk in the incentive component generate very little impact on behavior. Once you get between 10 to 20%, it's what we call a performance reminder, and it's not going to greatly affect people's behavior, but it does remind them when they don't achieve it that they missed out on an opportunity. Anywhere from 20 to up to 50%, you start to get directional or highly directional in terms of the impact on behavior. Between 20 to 30%, it's directional, and you're going to get people who it will start to impact the type of lifestyle that they live. Anywhere from 30 to 50%, it's going to impact their capability to live, to meet their obligations around mortgage and payments and family and so forth. So the plans become much more directional. People will have to follow what you're looking for or it will impact them. The interesting piece is once you get over 50%, you start to get what we call independent behavior. And then they start working for themselves versus working for you, and you get a very different type of behavior. Sometimes not the behavior you're looking for, but often some industries are very typical, things like real estate. Those are the types of roles where full commission is the norm, and everyone understands that. Another thing that impacts the mix is the type of accounts that you're working on. If I'm working on high volume, I've got 300 accounts on my list, and it's a highly transactional sale, then the likelihood is you're going to have more pay at risk. You're going to have a larger incentive component because you want the compensation to be affecting every decision that they make with those accounts. However, when I'm working with a very large account and the sales cycle may be 6, 12, 18 months, you don't necessarily want to have a very large incentive component because it may generate the wrong kind of aggressive sales behavior, and you need people who are more focused on working through a more defined process. The nature of the type of sales role as well and how it interacts with other roles will also determine the mix. In some cases, when people are individual salespeople and they really don't interact with others on the sale, those are probably more likely to have a higher mix of base and incentive. And that's what we call sales prominence, where those people are tied closely into the account, and the sale is made primarily because of their efforts, as opposed to maybe an undifferentiated or product that is very difficult to differentiate from the competition. A lot of roles, sales roles, however, today, especially in solution selling, the salesperson is part of a team. Their job is to coordinate. It's to bring together right resources. It's to ensure that the process around solution selling is followed and that the customer has alternatives to choose from, and the role is to guide them to select the right alternative. In those cases, you may have a team approach, so you may have others who need to be involved in the sales. Of pay at risk for the salesperson may in fact be less. The other thing is, if you have a lot of support, if the salesperson has a lot of support from finance, from other senior management who get involved in the actual sale, again, this may be reflective of a kind of sales role where you don't necessarily have a high degree of risk, but again, it becomes more of a coordination role. So the mix is tied to the degree of sales prominence or impact that the person has on delivering the sale. When we look at this, here's an example of where you would see lower prominence versus higher prominence. Lower prominence when there's competitive pricing and finance is involved a lot in pricing, when there's good support, when there's great collateral or a very strong brand, the need for high incentives may be less. However, in roles where sales initiative and creativity has been tied to higher prominence or is more of an important role, then the selling skill and the person's own network becomes a much higher component, and therefore there may be higher prominence. So prominence is not aligned necessarily with the pay level. In fact, it generally
Hi there, David. I think you've cut out here. Unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better. I don't know what happened there, but if you can maybe recap the last minute or so of your presentation, that'd be fabulous.
Okay, great. So the key here is to look at the degree of prominence in selling. So prominence is a measure of the degree to which the customer's decision to buy is influenced by the individual seller. Not the products, not the services supporting it, but the individual seller. It's characteristic of a role, and we want to make sure that we're, especially in single incumbent sales roles, that we're not actually rewarding for the competence that that individual brings, but the expectation of the sales role. So question 4, how frequently should we be paying out incentives? The primary focus here is looking at the sales cycle. And we see a disconnect oftentimes with organizations where they'll have a 6 to 12 month sales cycle, but they're paying out quarterly. So the person may go 1 or 2 quarters without getting a payout, as opposed to aligning the incentive to the actual sales. Now, in cases where they have a lot of sales in the pipeline, or there's enough customers on their list, you might be able to get away with quarterly. But again, it's very important when you're looking at the frequency of payout to look at the sales cycle. The other thing that we have to be careful about is looking at how much incentive we have in order to split up. So if we have a plan that's an 85-15 or an 80-20 plan with 80% base, 20% incentive, and we try to pay that out on a monthly basis, dividing that out by 12 may make it a very small payout after tax, and therefore immaterial, and it has no change on behavior. So both these things have to be taken into account, the amount of incentive and the sales cycle. You can also look at the plan mechanics to make sure, depending on how you're paying it out, that you're not overpaying early in the year and then having the person maybe not perform as well in the second half of the year, and at the end you're clawing back because they haven't met their targets, or in some cases, if they're working on a draw, they may actually owe you money. So one of the biggest issues in sales these days is target setting. Very often we'll get asked, do we have a target setting issue? Do we have a problem? So there are some indicators that will help you identify whether or not you have a problem. And the first and foremost, is the company hitting the required sales and financial goals? If they're not, then you have a target setting issue, obviously, because it can't be that your sales force as a whole isn't performing. So the likelihood is you have some issues, and you need to look at your performance distributions. So if more than 70% of your people are achieving quota, then the targets could be too low. Now, the only time that doesn't hold is if you have a lot of contracted revenue that comes through regardless of who's in that territory. Your actual achievement might be 75 or 80%, but those are few and far between. Typically, targets are too low if you've got 80 or 90% of your people hitting target. This, by the way, often happens when you get a change in the economy or the market, because targets are set at one point, and then as the market changes, they could become a lot easier if the economy is improving. Conversely, when fewer than 50% of your people are achieving quota, targets may be too high. Another indicator is looking at the number of outliers. These are people who may be performing at the lower end but are still getting payouts. Or sometimes we'll see this at the high end where performers are hitting their numbers, but they're not getting enough compensation. So target setting, especially on an individual basis, may be very difficult, but these are the types of indicators that you look at to see whether or not you are setting fair and reasonable targets. Another area that we get asked questions about a lot is what happens if I have some really large accounts? In situations where the large opportunities are causing difficulty in target setting, the best practice is to remove them from the quota and actually address them outside of the plan. So set up something specific for large opportunities, and then set the targets for those that are more within the annual plan cycle. Another question that you need to ask around target setting is, how do we set targets for managers? The term padding is where corporate allocates a certain target, and then the first level of management looks at that and says, well, in order to ensure that we achieve that, even if a few people miss their goals, we're going to add 5% to that number. Anywhere from 5 to 10% is actually quite normal for organizations. But if you get 5% at that level, and then 5% at the director level, and then 5% at the manager level, by the time it gets down to salespeople who are the feet on the street, the targets are too high and unachievable. And then the plan becomes more of a dissatisfier than a motivation. And finally, one of the things that we recommend is there should be a consistent process. Make sure that that process involves all of the stakeholders. So it may involve having people from marketing, from finance, from HR, from sales to participate as part of that process. And if you really want your salespeople to be engaged, we want to make sure that they are not they're not having the opportunity to participate. If they're not involved in the process, then it becomes your target and not theirs. Are we rewarding sales management? Interestingly enough, over the past several years, we've seen more and more effort that's being put into trying to get better efficiency and productivity out of the sales force. And to a large degree, we have, I think we've re-engineered so much that there's very little left in terms of productivity at the sales level. Where we haven't really focused at all is on the role of sales management. What do we want our sales managers to be doing, and how do we reward them adequately for the kind of delivery that we're expecting from them? We want to make sure that there's alignment between the sales force as well as sales management compensation. If not, we don't get people rowing in the same direction. We get people going in different directions. And oftentimes, as it says in the third bullet, measures that are used in the sales comp plan can create conflict. So if you have salespeople who are being measured on revenue and delivery of gross revenue, but you've got managers that are tied into margin, what ends up happening is salespeople are bringing in deals that the managers are rejecting. So make sure that there's alignment between the way in which you're rewarding your salespeople and the way in which you're rewarding your management. And the other piece is we are seeing more sales managers who also carry selling responsibilities, in particular for small to medium-sized organizations, and that requires a hybrid plan that has elements of both direct selling as well as management. And remember, managing is not an overlay function. Managers should be tied into the delivery of the results by their salespeople, not just tied into getting a piece of every person's sales. And finally, one of the things that we've found, especially when you're making changes to your sales compensation plans, is that sales supervisors and managers are the linchpins. They're the ones that will make your plan successful or not. And when you're looking for the process for implementation in particular, you must get them on board. You must have them being helping to drive the plan. Otherwise, you're not going to get the kind of results that you're after. Question 7. Do we have enough upside potential in our plans to drive overachievement? One of the things that we've seen in the past few years is that as organizations have struggled with fewer feet on the street, fewer sales resources, and increasing targets, is too many of the plans have focused on just getting to target. And as a result, what's happening is the company is not making its numbers, but salespeople are earning somewhere between 90 to 100% of their targeted income. And when that happens, salespeople are happy, but the company has to change something because they're not making their numbers and stakeholders aren't happy. So one way to approach this is to look at the achievement or overachievement of the target and make it meaningful. So if I'm paying commission up to target, I may want to change the rate or the curve. Instead of being a straight line, maybe make it pay out less, from threshold up to target, but then once they reach target, provide them with a bonus for achieving that target. What that does is it makes the target much more meaningful, and if they're at 90 to 95%, they're going to strive that much harder because there's a payout for them if they achieve. And if every additional sale above target is important to you, then change the payout curve to reinforce that overachievement. So look at how much more profitable a sale over target is once you've covered all your costs, and align that to the type of payout curve that you use above 100%. Question 8, how many measures should be in our sales comp plan? Well, it depends to some degree on the size of the incentive component. So if I've got 10 to 20% of my total compensation at risk on the incentive piece, putting in 4 measures is going to be way too much, because it's going to reduce the component in each measure to a point that when you pay it out, it's going to not be very material. Typically, 2 to 3 measures is ideal. Some organizations, when their focus is strictly on growth, high growth, and they're looking for a direct sales role to just drive revenue, they'll have 1 measure, a commission measure. Others, where they've got different products and services, they're looking for target achievement, they'll start to then add in another metric. One of the things that we're seeing more of as well is a focused product. So where the company pays commissions on all products, they may also want to target a specific product that's either high margin, new introduction, and they'll provide an additional measure that focuses strictly on that new product. In terms of deciding what to measure, the criteria for selecting effective sales compensation measures is you must be able to measure it accurately if you want to tie it to someone's compensation. And secondly, you have to be able to measure it consistently. So every period, you should be able to measure that component of performance consistently. If not, then don't use it as a measure. The other thing that we've seen a lot in the past is where companies have too many measures. In fact, I've seen anywhere from 9 to 15 measures in a sales compensation plan. And when you get that many measures, what you get is a loss of focus. I like to, when I see that, I always say, when your salespeople step out the door in the morning, what do they focus on? If they have a couple of measures, say they're measured on growth and retention, then it's clear to them where they focus their efforts. If I've got 9 to 10 measures in a plan, when I walk out the door in the morning, it's hard for me to focus on any one thing. There's so many things I'm being asked to focus on that it stops influencing their daily behavior. And in fact, most salespeople will still come to work and do the best job they can, but the sales compensation plan becomes a non-issue for them because it doesn't focus their efforts. So best practices, focus on the top 1 to 2 outcomes that you're looking for and measure and reward those. Question 9, how can I simplify my sales compensation plan? These next couple of questions, these are things where people are looking at it and saying, I need to change my plan and I really want to know how to do that. So to simplify, review the roles and determine what are the KPIs for your direct sales roles. What are the key performance indicators? What are the things that they have to deliver? Reduce the number of measures in the plan. As I said in the previous slide, focus on 1 to 2 KPIs and describe them very well. One of the biggest issues that we see in plans is that the measures aren't clearly defined and described to salespeople. And as a result, when it's not defined and everybody interprets differently, then that interpretation may mean that they all go off in different directions, trying to achieve what they think the goal is, and in fact they eat up a lot of resources. Some are very successful, a lot aren't. So make sure that the measures that you have in the plan are well defined, sometimes even including the process that needs to be followed. Utilize a sales compensation framework. We see a lot of organizations where there's just 15 to 20 different plans, but there's no structure within which it's managed. You want your plans to have the same look and feel, but be measured on different things. And being able to put them into a framework allows you then to see one plan versus the other, where they have to support each other, what are the support plans, what are the roles that are direct sales. Another way to simplify, select one key financial metric. When you put too many financial metrics in, you tend to get people confused in terms of what you find most important. So select the one financial metric that's important and that's also within their line of sight. If you have, frontline salespeople that are being rewarded and one of their measures is EBITDA, the likelihood is they have zero impact on that metric, and as a result, it does nothing for them in terms of their behavior or their focus. So find that one metric that's within their line of sight and that they can influence, and focus on that. Another way to simplify, remove discretionary elements. Keep it objective, things that you can measure accurately and consistently. If you have discretionary components in there, every manager will use their discretion in different ways depending on what's worked for them before or the way in which they like to manage. Some of them are tough, others are easier. And as a result, your plan does not have the same degree of consistency, and that will cause you more issues with the sales force, which tends to make the plans look a lot more complicated than they are. Also, reduce the number of levels in bonus measures. I've seen plans where they have 25 to 30 levels by 1% increments. Expand the performance range, but interpolate if you have to. So if I have a plan that instead of having 20 levels above the target, do it in 5 to 10% increments, so there's 4 or 5 levels, and then if you want to do it strictly on what they deliver, then interpolate in between. So if I get, if I'm between 110 and 115% of target, and I hit 112, then you interpolate and pay me at 112. Other organizations now are saying, if you're at 112, work a little harder to stretch to get to that 115 for the next payout. And one of the things that we tell clients is simple really means easy to understand. So when you're describing these things, don't use all kinds of technical language. Describe it so that it's easily understood by everybody that's participating in the plan. And question number 10 is, with economic improvement, what sales compensation plan will support a growth objective? Well, the plan has to have enough incentive component to make it interesting for the salesperson. So if you have growth opportunity and you want salespeople to be focused on growth, you need to have enough in the plan. So 30 to 40% of their total income should be tied into incentives. It has to have both a new business plus a retention component. We see a lot of industries where churn is a very essential element of the performance of the business. They'll be spending a lot of money to bring in new accounts, but the retention component is lacking, and as a result, the new business is going out the back door as fast as it's coming in. So new business should be a commissionable type of approach with a robust upside built into the reward for any overachievement. The retention measure should probably be a bonus or perhaps a bonus with some sort of a modifier for average gross margin or increased rate if it's a rate-driven business, to ensure that you're not only achieving the revenue growth, but you're also getting profitability. Where you have long-term opportunities that are very large, that are going to take salespeople anywhere from 18 to 24 months, allow them to add one breakthrough account for each salesperson. These are large opportunities, they're long sales cycles. Identify the method by which you want to pay for that account and put it on top of their annual plan. The reason for this is those types of accounts require investment. You have to invest time, effort, meetings, support in the sale, and during a typical annual sales cycle and plan, the likelihood is you may not get an incentive for those. These breakthrough accounts you pay out on conclusion. So once the deal is signed, pay them right then. That's much more motivational. And then once they've closed that sale, let them add one more to it. So these are just a few ways to support a growth objective in your plans for 2018. So what should your answers tell you? Well, plans should be audited at least every 3 years. And when you go through the audit, you're looking at things like alignment to strategy. Have things changed that we need to realign our plans? Are we using the right metrics? Is there a link between performance and payout? So auditing your plans allows you to identify where there are gaps between where you are now and where you need to be in the future. And when you identify those gaps, depending on the size of the gap, will determine how much change you can make in your plans. If, as an organization, you're struggling, it poses the question, do we use evolution or revolution? Evolution is where you make modest change towards the achievement of a state where your sales compensation plan really is supporting it, supporting your business goals. And when the company's not doing bad, you still need to be evolving the plans forward because things change with the business and with the market, and your evolution needs to follow that. Conversely, if profitability has dropped, if the company isn't performing, you may need to look at revolution. You may need to make significant changes. We saw a lot of that after 2009 and 2010 when we had the financial collapse. Companies changed their plans dramatically. There were layoffs, there were reorganizations, and those reorganizations required revolutionary change to the sales comp plan. The other thing is you also need to look at what needs to be aligned with the sales compensation plan. Sales compensation is one element of what management has to be able to improve sales performance. But how do we optimize that? Well, there are some elements that need to be tied into that. So there are what we call dependencies, and dependencies are things that may not be sales compensation related, but they definitely influence the ability to optimize your sales compensation plan's effectiveness. Some of these are your data quality. The biggest issue that we hear from managers is, I get data too late and I get it, I can't rely on it because the quality of the data isn't good. Good data quality equals good information for decision making. Second thing is sales competence. Putting the right sales compensation plan in front of salespeople who don't have the skills or competencies to be able to act on it is frustrating. So make sure that if you're, for example, transitioning from transactional sales to solution sales, your salespeople need to be able to do solution selling properly in order to achieve. Good tracking and reporting. When you have 5 salespeople, it's fairly easy, unless the selling role is very complex, to use tools like Excel or other spreadsheet applications to track. Once you get up over 10, 15, 20 salespeople, the ability to track and report starts to become much more essential. And as a result, the need to have systems in place to support the sales compensation plan is essential as well. Strong management. Boy, I'll tell you, so many organizations rely on the sales compensation plan to manage the behavior of their salespeople. Sales comp plan doesn't manage. Good managers manage well with the use of the sales compensation plan. You also need executive support, particularly if you're going to make changes to your plan. What you don't want to do is make changes to the plan without having the support of the people at the top of the organization, and they should be the ones that are telling you where the plans or where the business is going, and therefore what the sales compensation plan has to support. You need effective sales processes, because you want salespeople to be focused together on the same kinds of things, and that makes your sales compensation plan more efficient, because it's not having to take into account wide ranges in sales performance and behavior. And finally, sales compensation is not a project. It's not something you do and then put on the shelf. Sales compensation is a journey, and that journey can be a frustrating one. It can lead to positive and negative types of behavior, but if you've done the right job in terms of design and in terms of how you manage it and administer it, you will find that it will be a critical success factor in your organization's ability to sell effectively. So that's the presentation. I'm open to any questions that you have. Feel free to ask me anything. Rupalin, you're going to handle the questions and read them to me?
Sounds great. Any questions that are asked, I will send through. David, can you hear me at all?
Hello?
Hi there, David. So I'm just waiting for questions here. To the audience, the Q&A session is now open, so please feel free to ask any questions about the webinar, and I will send them over to David for any answering. So we have one here, David. If we have several measures in our plan today, how do we get to 2 to 3?
You need to take a step back and identify from the business goals and objective what are some of the key deliverables that you're looking for, and how do you want your sales compensation plan to address those. When you have multiple measures today, it's often very hard to get people with different interests to give up the element of the sales compensation plan that's focused on their interests. But this is where you need to utilize your senior management team, and either through interviews or some sort of a focus group of that meeting of those folks, come up with the top 2 or 3 things that they are looking to achieve, and then focus your sales compensation plan on that. Take what's existing, put it to the side, identify what you're going to need for the future.
Thank you. And we've got another one here. How do you feel about separating new business sales versus retention? We have relationship managers to focus on retention versus salespeople to focus on driving new business.
You know, I'm seeing this more and more. It used to be that salespeople were responsible for both the new business element as well as the account management. But as selling has become more specialized, and as the number of resources have been reduced, we're starting to see a lot more new business development roles versus account management roles. I think in terms of the size of the market, as well as the growth potential, where you still have significant growth, then the business development role becomes critical. And I think people, you know, the old adage around hunters and farmers, they're very different. What you really mean by hunters and farmers is they have different competencies. Hunters are people who love to go out and do new business. Farmers are people that like to manage relationships and grow the business organically from existing accounts. Typically, you don't find people that are strong at both. The only time that I think it works that you use the same role for both is where you have a very small organization. As you start to get into larger organizations where you've got 20 or 30 salespeople, I believe that you know, we're moving much more towards having the new business folks who are tied into, and by the way, their plans tend to be much higher in terms of the incentive component. So anywhere from 40 to 50% of their total compensation should be based on bringing in that new business. They should also, they may also, however, require a period of time, unless they're bringing a book of business with them, they may require some guarantees at the very beginning of their tenure until such time as they can get into your customer base, identify the needs, and then come forward with solutions. On the other side, account management roles will tend to be more of an 80-20 type of role where the people are involved, the base salary is tied into that relationship management, and the incentive is tied more into doing business planning with the customer, identifying opportunities to expand the product line into their organization. But I definitely see much more of this split between new business and account management.
Okay. We've also got, should sales compensation plans be based on order entry or invoice sales?
Depends on who you talk to in the organization. If you talk to finance, they'll say once the cash is in the bank. Salespeople would say as soon as I bring you the order. More and more, however, sales organizations are being tied into revenue recognition by the company. We ran into a lot of issues with this, with organizations that were recognizing revenue that actually never came to fruition. So having orders, doing it on orders, a lot will depend on the history that you have with those customers, and whether that those orders are contracted revenue or you know, just booked orders. So I would be careful on booked order side, unless the objective is the salesperson throws it over the fence and the company then is responsible for making sure that it happens. If you're going to reward people for that, then you better make sure you have the capability internally to manage it. Conversely, the rule of thumb is to say you stop paying a person for the sale when you want them to stop working on it. So if you're asking people to participate in the sale up to maybe including, for example, if it's machinery that you're selling, sometimes salespeople are involved in the actual ensuring that the implementation takes place and that the customer training gets done. If you're asking the person to stay involved in the sale, then don't pay them until such time, don't pay them everything until such time as you want them to stop working on it.
Perfect, David. I think that we are just about out of time here. As David said, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to use his email address as placed on the screen. On behalf of the CPSA, we want to thank you, of course, David, our host, and our audience for attending today's webinar. Should you have any questions for the CPSA, please feel free to contact salessuccess@cpsa.com. And for those of you who are requesting a video copy of the webinar, please stay tuned. This will be emailed to you shortly. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today on today's webinar. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, everyone.